But why don't we get our panelists to come up too? Please do come up and join me. So for this evening's discussion, I'm going to try to, well, our goal is really to compound the topics to current and recent events as well as future outlook, because I've been told by the event organizing team that I need to keep this within 30 minutes. So my own credibility is on the line, because as if you've spoken to any of my colleagues, they will tell you how hard on I am on people in terms of following the rules. But if we have time, I will open up the discussion to the audience to pose questions of their own. If we don't have time, or we don't have time to get your questions, then please do catch one of any of our lovely panelists after during the networking session, and they will be more than happy to talk about regulatory compliance. So before we begin, I just want to introduce our panelists. So sitting directly to my left, we have Lori Stein. So Lori is the co-head of McCarthy Tétrault's FinTech group, and she's also the partner at McCarthy's Security Regulatory and Investment Products groups in Toronto. So she is at the forefront of the fast-moving digital asset space, and she regularly engages with the Canadian Securities Administrators on behalf of crypto asset trading platforms and other fintechs. And to her left, we have Amber Scott. Amber is the founder and CEO of Outlier Compliance Group. She is a self-described compliance geek who focuses on anti-money laundering and privacy regulations. And then last but not least, we have Richard Zhou at the end. So Richard is the president, CEO, and director of Blockchain Venture Capital, Inc. They are the issuer of the CADT fiat-backed stablecoin. And he's also the president of Green Panda Capital Corp, which is listed on the TSXV. And currently he also acts as the advisor to multiple Fortune 500 and NASDAQ listed companies. So having gotten that out of the way, I do want to start the discussion tonight on stablecoins, because there's been a lot of news about stablecoins, and really stablecoins is something that's really growing and receiving more and more adoption these days. So this first question is for you, Richard. So we've seen a variety of different types of stablecoins come to market over the years. So these include fiat-backed stablecoins. We've got non-fiat-backed stablecoins backed by a variety of different assets, and also the notorious algorithmic stablecoins. How do you see upcoming regulations affecting the current landscape?
Thanks, Stephen, for the question. So actually, it's a very good question. So I know compliance and regulatory requirement always a headache for the market, especially for stablecoin industries. So as far according to my knowledge, so eventually all of stablecoins, so have to get registered in the securities commissions, and those unregistered, unlicensed stablecoins, they have to think about the way how to get around the regulatory requirements. So otherwise they have to maybe drop out of the market. And in terms of basic criteria as a stablecoin, I believe at least they should have custodian escrow service to store customer fiat money, and they should have at least backed by a fiat or a certain amount of assets, and also maybe they should have an in-house compliance officer to sign off all of these transactions. I know Steven is compliance officer, and our compliance officer, me, is here, and the lawyer, Matthew, is here. So yes, compliance and also auditor, that's very important. At least, so there should be auditors to sign off monthly or quarterly auditor reports for all of the fiat and stable coins transactions.
Okay, thank you for the response. So as a follow-up to that, recently, just this past February, so New Jersey Rep. John Gottheimer recently published a bill which provides a definition for stablecoins. So how do you see these potential upcoming laws affecting the stablecoin market, and will there be certain players who stand to benefit from these regulations?
Well, yes, these are two questions. So first, I see this the news, this proposed bill is trying to regulate a stablecoin. However, this is a definition of a stablecoin only. I don't see any clear guidance what the specific rules or compliance process we should follow with. That due to the lack of transparency and absence from regulators, so that will cause a big problem for the market, and it will hurt the stablecoin industry badly. So that's unfortunately until now we don't see any very clear guidance of a stablecoin. So the whole industry will get hurt. But in terms of who will get the benefit from this, so I'm not sure if this is a good answer or not, but I believe my company, we are one of the companies maybe get the benefit from this because we are fully registered and licensed. We just got approval from Canadian Securities Exchange, CSE, so we will be listed on CSE very soon. We got approval of a stock trading ticker, a BDCI. So in the coming a few days or weeks, so you will see our company will be listed on a stock exchange. So that's why I think maybe we are one of companies got the benefit from this. Okay, thank you.
Well, congratulations on the listing, by the way.
Okay, thank you.
So, that is interesting. You mentioned that the regulators have been slow in coming up with regulations to regulate the stablecoin markets. With the collapse of Terra Luna and the UST, do you see that changing? Do you see the regulators getting in because so many investors got burned through that collapse?
Yes, since the collapse of UST and the Luna token, I think regulators start to crack down on stable coin. I follow the correspondence from G7 country, central banks and legislature. I see they are tightening the rules right now. So they require all stable coins at least to have a fiat fund or physical asset to be backed with, and also they should have a auditing report. So yeah, that will be the future regulatory requirement. I think not only for stablecoin, maybe for most of cryptocurrencies. So I cannot answer too much for this because I'm not expert on this, because I think there's so many lawyers, consultants here, so maybe they know more answer than I do. Thanks.
Well, thank you for the response. So, as a follow-up, Lori, where do you see stablecoin regulation in Canada? Is there a risk that stablecoins or certain types of stablecoins become labeled as securities here? So.
Hello? Yeah. Hi. First of all, it's pretty cool to hear that your stablecoin is going to be listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange. That's pretty interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading the prospectus. So, in my view, and I've held this view for a long time, it is possible to regulate stablecoins as securities, derivatives, and potentially even as investment funds. I think that the way that the securities legislation in Canada is drafted is extremely broad, and it's designed to protect investors. So if the Canadian Securities Administrators or any regulator views an investor protection risk associated with a stablecoin, they will figure out a way to fit stablecoins within the regulatory framework. That being said, the securities regulators have been aware of stablecoins and their importance in the digital asset ecosystem for many years, and they haven't taken any steps to enforce Canadian securities laws directly against any stablecoin issuer. Rather, our regulators have really put the onus on the intermediaries, the crypto trading platforms, which are being regulated, as you know, as dealers and marketplaces, to do an analysis of every token that they list and determine that that token is not a security or derivative. So the regulator is really pushing the responsibility onto the intermediary. All that being said, I think that the regulator also has been taking a wait-and-see approach, because it's clear that even though stablecoins could be regulated as securities, it's also likely that they could be regulated as payment products, as banking products, under other prudential regulatory regimes. So I think that our securities regulators have been wanting to see what sort of the global approach on stablecoin regulation is, and to not rush too far ahead to take a different approach than what their peers are taking elsewhere in the world. Just one other little point is that in the May 2022 budget, the federal government did announce that they are doing a legislative review on the digitization of money, and that's expected to include a review of stablecoins and the possibility of issuing a central bank backed digital currency in Canada. Don't worry, last panel, far from happening. And they just put out a call for consultants to help them, the federal government, with that project. So if there are any consultants in the room, I encourage you to apply, because the most important thing we can do is educate the government on what this stuff is and why it's a good thing. Because if we don't give them the reasons to regulate in a friendly way, that's when they'll regulate in a sort of a fearful way.
Okay, going a little bit broader then.
Wait, sorry, Fred came back into the room. I have to give a shout out to Fred, who came off his boat and is here with us at the Futurist Conference. I haven't seen Fred since pre-pandemic, so I'm so happy to see you. Had to take a little bit of time there, thank you.
No worries, no worries. So I think, going a little bit broader now, we've seen the SEC just last month take action against Coinbase employees, alleging insider trading and fraud, and they've also listed 9 cryptocurrencies as securities. So this is probably one of the more aggressive actions they've taken to date against a big player, at least recently. How do you foresee this impacting this industry, and where do you see future actions taking? Is this really just a start, and do others need to be worried out there?
I think it's just a start, and I think people should be worried. I think that the strategy that the SEC took, which was rather than going after a big player like Coinbase for listing all of these tokens, or going after the issuer of tokens, they went after these guys for insider trading, some guy on the new listing committee who was tipping off his brother and his buddy, and they're asking for a jury trial. And as we know, it's less likely to get a sophisticated decision that understands the nuance from a jury trial. So I think that there was a real strategic approach that was taken by the SEC to sort of backdoor a decision on the investment contract application of the Howey test to digital assets through an insider trading complaint, and doing it sort of hand in hand with the Department of Justice as well. I mean, it's quite a tag team approach. It's very American. I don't think that anything like that is coming from Canada, but it definitely does present a risk of things to come for issuers, and really paying close attention to that investment contract test when you're designing your protocol and your governance structure.
Well, that's a relief to hear. That's probably not coming to Canada. And as a follow-up, so we've heard the perspective from securities regulations. Now, Amber, FinTrack has indicated that they will become a little bit more active in terms of scrutinizing entities that operate as virtual currency dealers here in Canada. Do you see that as a increased risk for industry participants in Canada? Is this something they need to be worried about?
It's an increased risk if you're not getting it right. And they are starting to examine in the sector. And I won't say raise your hand if you've had a recent FinTrack exam, but I know there's some folks here that have. So they're starting to do exams in the sector, and the risk if you mess it up is significant. So it's not just a penalty, it's also a name and shame game where if you're offside from an anti-money laundering perspective and they assess a penalty, your name ends up published. And it ends up published even if you do a federal appeal, and that's a change that we had in 2019. So yes, there's significant risk there, but I think the thing that I can say that's comforting is that when I say it's a risk if you're getting it wrong, generally when you see penalties, especially penalties for first examinations, it's not a penalty that happened because we have a compliance program in place, we have a compliance officer, we missed a deadline, we reported something late, we got something wrong. So if you're trying and you can prove that you're trying to get it right, you're probably not going to get a penalty. But if you have not done any of those things, and when you look at the penalties on FinTrack's website, sometimes the finding is something like the absence of a compliance program, which is crazy. You couldn't be bothered to slap some documents in a binder and try to say that you were doing anything to comply. Like those are the types of areas where we're seeing penalties. So it's generally not something, especially for early stage companies, where if you've put in your best efforts and you've done the work, you're going to see a penalty from a first exam. They're going to treat the first exam as a learning experience. But in that first exam, they're going to tell you a couple things, like that they might do a follow-up exam, and that in that follow-up exam, they will treat any repeat deficiencies very seriously. And this is what we would call a very strong hint from a regulator.
Okay, so I mean, delving deeper into the new regulations that came out on June 1st, 2021, one of the new requirements is the FATF Recommendation 16, or otherwise known as the travel rule. Now, this is one regulation that the industry has struggled with. It's likely impossible to comply in its full degree. However, we have seen some solutions come to market. So there appears to be some early adopters so far in Canada as well as in a few other countries. Do you see the adoption by these early adopters to be a risk to other players? Is there going to be increased pressure or expectation on other players that may not have adopted the travel rule into their compliance programs to be enforced upon?
Yeah, so it's made its way into our law, and FinTrack as a regulator doesn't have the ability to say that the law isn't the law. So even though it's impossible to comply perfectly, and you're correct in that, having perfect compliance with the travel rule at this point where you're transmitting the information all the time, not possible. But you should be doing something to comply with the travel rule. And at minimum, there needs to be some record keeping, there needs to be an attempt to collect this information that you're supposed to collect. And so those types of things are the things that play out in an exam. And in FinTrack examinations right now, they're not penalizing people, as far as I know, in relation to the travel rule in the crypto asset space. But they are asking companies in the context of their examination what they're doing to comply with the travel rule, what technology platforms they're looking at. So if you haven't at least started looking at and scoping out that solution, that's probably something that's worth prioritizing sooner rather than later. And they know it's not going to be perfect, for what that's worth. FinTrack isn't coming in doing exams saying, we expect absolutely perfect compliance, but they expect something to be happening.
Okay. And looking forward now, so the Bank of Canada is currently developing a supervisory framework for regulating payment service providers, and we know that it's going to cover cryptocurrencies. Can you share a little bit of what you know about this? What can people expect, and when can we expect it?
I think that's the big question. So there is a council of folks from industry that are advising. We know that the Bank of Canada is working on regulation. They've said that we can expect to see something possibly as early as this fall. But until we've actually seen that regulation, we have a general sense of what it looks like, but I think the devil is always in the details when it comes to regulation. And so I assume that we're going to see a draft that's going to be presented to industry. And anyone who knows me knows this is a soapbox that I love to hop up on and talk. But when that draft is presented, if you read the draft, which please do, or your counsel reads it or your compliance officer reads it, and you say, oh snap, I do not like this. This can adversely impact me. I don't think it's written correctly. I think this definition is wrong. Please participate in your industry associations, submit feedback. That's what the whole drafting process is designed to do. So the only way that we get to better, stronger, more effective regulation that suits us as an industry is when everyone participates and comments. And I can say a huge kudos to the virtual currency industry because all of your comments made the Department of Finance make updates to the virtual currency related AML regulation, and it made it better. And that doesn't happen when we don't comment en masse. So pretty please, make comments.
Yeah, I can't reiterate that enough because it's a lack of comment that results in extremely onerous compliance requirements. So if you're not part of an industry group, please do reach out and we can definitely point you in the right direction in terms of how to offer your support. And then this last question, I just got signaled we have 3 minutes left, is going to you, Lori. So looking forward to what the CSA has in store for us, I mean, they've required crypto asset dealers to register as such, and same with crypto asset exchanges. We've seen some enforcement actions taken by the OSC against the major global exchanges. What else is there? I mean, it seems like they've got a lot ahead of them.
Sure, I'll answer that really quickly. I do think that our regulators are doing a good job in terms of setting up a framework. They're trying to be flexible, they're trying to accommodate innovation, but they also are trying to protect investors. So we now have 8 regulated platforms. I expect there will be another probably 2 or 4 by the end of 2022. And then I think that there will be a gradual expansion of the scope of activities that crypto trading platforms are permitted to engage in. I know that the regulators are looking at staking and trying to understand how that can be offered in a safe way. The regulators are interested in DeFi, maybe a little bit less interested now post Luna collapse and post sort of centralized trading, lending platform collapse. But I do think that they're trying to accommodate the innovation, and of course they are very eager for the platforms to move into IROC. So that will be a whole new phase, and I think that there'll be a whole group going together. And as we've just said, there are strength in numbers, and competitors should still be working together to try to have a positive impact on the development of the regulatory framework.
All right, thank you everyone.
Thank you, Stephen. I'd also like to thank a round of applause for Lori, Richard, and Amber. Our panelists this evening did a great job. What an engaging topic. Thank you guys.